Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining today's webinar on how to best deploy sensors for maximum accuracy, reliability, and long-term success when undertaking an occupancy or utilization study within your workplace. My name is David Thomas, and I'll be your host for today. If you do have any questions throughout the presentation, please do drop them in the Q&A or chat function, and I'll try my best to get to them during the 15 minutes we've got, but if not, I'll make sure to get back to you afterwards. So today we're going to discuss a variety of things, but firstly we're going to talk about what sensors there are to build into these solutions and where they're best suited to be used and some challenges that come with them. We're then going to look at some common kind of pitfalls people tend to fall into when deploying sensors and how to mitigate these problems before sharing some best practice guidance on how to deploy some more complex sensors to make sure that they're providing accurate data in the most reliable way. Then we're going to take a kind of step back from the sensors themselves to look at why we recommend deploying sensors across a LoRaWan network rather than, say, a Wi-Fi or Bluetooth network. To finish up, we're going to talk very briefly about why communication in these kind of studies is so important as well. So without further ado, let's look at the sensors that there are available to use. So first up, we have desk PIR sensors. PIR stands for passive infrared. These are little sensors, probably 2 times the size of a pound coin, that sit underneath desks and they monitor heat and motion to tell you whether or not someone is sat in front of them. So these are primarily used on desks or phone booths, private meeting areas, focus areas, that kind of thing. And they tell you when they're in use throughout the day and for how long, but don't pass any personal information. So it doesn't say who's there, it just says that someone's there. Next up, we have footfall counters. So these are used to kind of count how many people are going in and out of a space throughout the day. So cafeterias, thoroughfare areas, any kind of shared space where you want to get an understanding of how they're used throughout the day. This is where these come in. And then the same, or well, similar, with room counting sensors. These tell you how many people are in a meeting room at any one time. They sit on the ceiling and tell you whether an 8-person meeting room has 6 people in or 4 people. And then there's also room presence sensors, which work in the same way that desk PRs do. They just tell you whether or not anyone is in that room. And we'll come on to when is best to deploy the 2 of them in a moment. But finally, the fourth kind of sensor that we bring into our solutions on a regular basis is the environmental sensors. The one that you can see on screen captures CO2, temperature, and humidity data all through the one sensor. There are separate sensors which do noise, but those 3 are the primary ones that we deal with because they kind of impact cognitive ability, drowsiness throughout the day, and currently are very important because they also have a big impact on safety in terms of COVID-19 and making sure that air quality is up to scratch and up to the standards that people want to be safe. So now that we've got the sensors sorted, I'm going to take you through some kind of key considerations to take into account when you're in the planning stage of your study. And the best piece of advice I think that I could give you is to work backwards from your goals when you're discussing sensors. So think to yourself, what decisions do I want to be making in a year's time? What changes do I want to be able to make? Or how do I want the workplace to be able to flex or move? And what data do I actually need to get these conclusions? Once you've got an idea of the metrics that you'll want to be studying, the key data points, that's when you can look at your floor plans and the space itself and decide what sensors are best to put where to actually get that data that you require. It's very tempting to look at your floor plans and go, boom, let's put sensors everywhere. But the truth is you might be oversaturated in data, might not use all of it. So from an ease of use and efficiency and also a cost point of view, it's best to be very critical and evaluate your thought processes at every stage of this process. Building on this, this feeds into like the granularity point that I've got next. And I've got a couple of examples of where the same sensors or different sensors can be used depending on the use case you've got in mind or the challenge you've got in mind. So say you had a bank of 100 collaborative desks that people can come down, like touch down on, use whenever they want. And you want to know, firstly, one person might want to know how often they're used throughout the day, just on average. Someone else might want to know exactly which desks are being used throughout that period. If you just want to get a general picture of how these desks are being used, you don't need to put a sensor on each one. You can probably hit 50 of them and then extrapolate that data outwards to cover the whole bank of them. But if you did want to know which 50 can I get rid of now, then you want to put a desk PR sensor on every one of them. Similarly with meeting rooms, you kind of want to look at the potential you have to make changes to the rooms. And that might dictate which sensor is best suited. So if you've got a series of 4-person meeting rooms, realistically, they can't be repurposed to much else other than potentially a private office or a kind of focus area. So you just want to know if that's in use, because 1 or 2 or 3 people in a 4-person meeting room is still a pretty effective use of that room. It's when you start getting to the larger rooms, such as the 8, 10, 12-person rooms, that's when you want to counter. Because if you can see that you have a series of 12-person meeting rooms that are being used throughout the day by only 2 people, cool. That's a serious opportunity for optimization in the workplace. They can be repurposed and you can use your space far more effectively. And this is kind of similar with communal areas as well, such as cafeterias. If you have a cafeteria with loads of tables and benches and stuff, you might be tempted to put desk sensors throughout that, little PIR sensors. But realistically, not many people want to know that. It's more important just to identify the busy periods throughout the day, the trends throughout the week. And for that, 1 footfall counter in the doorway would get the job done far more effectively and efficiently. Moving on now to kind of considerations in placement and staying with the cafeteria example, one thing that you need to consider is this space itself actually fixed? Is it going to stay the same as it's mapped on the floor plans? And typically in a cafeteria environment, you might be able to kind of like move the tables around to sit who you want to. So it might not end up matching exactly what is on the dashboard. So then that's another reason to use the footfall counter in that area. So you need to kind of think what's going to happen in the space in the short term and will it work with the sensors we have in place. Similarly, it pays to be very critical of the space that you have in terms of the actual physical layout of it. So if you've got very high ceilings, for example, or quite wide doorways that people could potentially kind of walk down the edge of and be avoided by the sensor, or if the sensor's too high and it won't pick them up, that's something you need to be able to be aware of. And that's why on-site visits are very important very early on, so that these problems can be addressed, identified, and alternative solutions with different sensors can be then put into place to actually get that solution working. And the final point on this slide is maximizing longevity of placement. And this kind of refers only to the desk PIR sensors in terms of just not putting them on the very edge of your desk where it's likely to get knocked off. You want to place them probably, if you're holding in your hand, an elbow depth into the table, facing towards you, make sure they're not twisted the wrong way around, and make sure there's nothing blocking their line of sight, because that will just mean that someone can be sat there and it won't pick them up. So quite simple things, but very, very important to make sure that the sensors are able to do their job best. So I'm just going to quickly address a question we've had come in. How do you use footfall sensors to not double count people as they come and go throughout the day? So the way the sensor works is it has cameras which divide the doorway into 3 areas, so 1, 2, 3, or a 3, 2, 1. So someone going in would go 1, 2, 3, and that counts as an in, and then someone coming out would go 3, 2, 1, and that counts as an out. And it keeps a tally of in versus out throughout the day. And if there's more than one entrance or exit, you can put sensors on both of them and kind of silo the area off. So 1 in and 1 out through the separate area is also worked out through the system there as well. Now we're going to quickly move on to the next section, which is a couple of examples we've encountered when kind of dealing with the deployments or people in the research stage of their studies. And the first up is deploying counter sensors in meeting rooms, and whether to do this on the ceiling or on the wall. And I'm just going to say it clearly, would always recommend putting these on the ceiling, primarily for the reason that you can see in front of you. It's to do with field of view. If there's a group of people sat in a room and the ceiling and the sensor is above them, it will be able to see all of them all the time. If there's a sensor on the wall and there's 8 people sat in 2 rows of 4, as it's quite common, it will only pick up the 2 people closest to it and everyone else will be hidden from their line of view. And when you actually think about what you're trying to get from having a counter sensor in there, this is completely detrimental to their purpose, because you will be being told that this room, which has currently got 8 people in, so it's being used perfectly, is being very underutilized. And when you consider the cost of these counter sensors, it's completely pointless doing it this way. And we found in our own individual testing that accuracy drops from 95% when they're on the ceiling to down to 60% when they're on the walls. And furthermore, ceiling mounted, far easier to get power to these sensors. They're doing a significant amount of processing within the sensor itself, so they need to be powered. And it's far easier to bring power to them through a ceiling than it is to drill through a wall or have ugly cables running up the side of a wall, which not many people are fond of. So on to the next example that we've got. I'm going to talk briefly about environmental sensors. The key thing to consider in this, and it's going to be the complete opposite piece of advice as I just gave you on the previous slide, is to have them at head height. Don't put these ones on the ceiling. We've come across a lot of people who kind of naturally want to put these on the ceiling, but these you should have roughly head height, be that when you're sitting or standing. We would say sitting because that's where you spend most of your time, but you basically want to know what the air quality is where you spend most of your time. And there will be a difference between head height and the ceiling. And these sensors should be used anywhere there's kind of communal access, lots of people milling about, lots of different people milling about, to make sure that it's safe, and also poorly ventilated areas. So say meeting rooms that have no windows. That's where you want to have these sensors in. You don't have to have them in all of them, but if you have them in one meeting room that you know is poorly ventilated, you can use that as kind of a case study and then adjust the ventilation to the rest of them according to how that one is used. And that brings me on to my next point, which is the need to have these kind of spread throughout the office. A lot of people are bringing environmental sensors into their workplace, but only one or two, and often they're quite close to each other. And you want to have them in a variety of spaces, which are used differently throughout the day, so that you can start to plan how to spread occupancy about the office to keep these levels safer. I'm just going to quickly answer a second question. Will the sensors note what time people are coming in and out, or just totals per day? So yeah, they keep a count throughout the day as well. So that tally is noted throughout the day, so you can then see throughout the day when people are passing through that most. So you can, if it was in a cafeteria, for example, you'll be able to see that this many people came in this window and this many people came out in this window. And you can set that to be an hour, a day, a week, a month, whatever period you're kind of interested in looking at. So it's constantly looking, constantly noting, and the data is sent continuously to our gateways and then through to the dashboard, so you can break it down into whatever period of time that you need to actually be looking at. Moving on to the actual kind of network side of things now. We deploy across LoRaWan. LoRa stands for long range, and it's over radio waves, which means that they just go significantly further than Wi-Fi or Bluetooth because they just have a lower frequency. And this means that there's less what we call path loss, which is to do with the natural obstructions that the building themselves pose to data transmission. So big elevator columns, thick walls, that kind of thing. If you use Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, you're going to need more gateways. You're going to need more gateways per sensors going to be necessary, which is going to add to the infrastructure of the deployment itself, make everything more complicated, and you're also more likely to get drop-offs throughout the study. LoRaWan is also, it's a very open type of technology, so you can bring different manufacturers' tech in and involve it in your IoT project very easily to get the best data and the best results. And they're also highly secure from an internal perspective because you control where the data is captured, where it's sent to, and where it ends up. So you can encrypt at every level. And similarly, compared to Wi-Fi, it's very secure because it just doesn't touch existing IT infrastructure. It's completely separate, so you can bring things out in and out and change it without having to really involve IT teams at all. You'll probably need to get their approval, but that once it's up and running, they won't be involved in any changes or tweaks going forwards. And it also means that it's very, very secure from a third-party access. People can't hack into the sensors and then get into the rest of your network as well, which there was a case recently where a company introduced Wi-Fi fridges and they got hacked through their fridges. So you don't want that happening, and that's why we use LoRa. But I'm quickly going to go through the final point, which is the importance of communication in utilization studies. So firstly, communication from a very early stage in the planning part of these is vital to understand the full scope and potential of what you can actually do with this data. If you're only talking to one team that has a vested interest in the workplace, you're only going to get one perspective. Bringing HR, facilities, space, real estate, all the people who have to deal with the workplace, bring them together, ask what they want, ask what they need, and then you can actually get the sensors in place early to make sure that everyone has what they need. And the same data point from the same sensor can then be twisted and used by individual teams to suit their needs. Like, everyone will have different priorities, but the same sensor can be used by all of them. And you won't know this, and you probably won't get the deployment right if you don't involve them at the very beginning. And secondly, this is a very, very important point, and it has, when not been done, bitten other companies in the behinds. It's really important to make sure that employees are told very early on what these sensors are for, what they're gathering, and what their purpose is, so that employees know that there's no personal data being gathered, there's no big brother situation going on. It's just purely understanding asset use and spatial use to make sure that the workplace is fit for purpose, optimized, and providing everyone with the tools that they need to do their job as best they can. If you kind of clarify that early, you're more likely to get a successful study, and you're more likely to get employee buy-in and also exec buy-in and any type of buy-in. So my final point is to do with accidental removal of sensors. If people don't know what something is, they're more likely to knock it off and not really report it because they might not be sure what it was or what it was doing there in the first place. Or if they're not sure what it is, they might take it off because they don't trust what it is and they think it's a big brother situation. If you tell people what things are, why it's there, well, less likely to have these kind of situations evolving in the first place. So we are currently over our 15 minutes. Thank you very, very much, everyone, for your time. I hope it's been useful, and I'll see you next month when we go into our next one. Thank you very much.